Hello everyone. So now let's talk about the project scope management. So last time we discussed the integration management. We covered around 7 processes. The first one, which was the project charter, one of the important ones. Many questions from it, approximately 10 questions, an important one. Then we move towards the plan, the project management plan, the father. Then moving forward, we did the execution process where we got the deliverables and we documented the lessons learned. Then I would say the most important one, which would approximately 20 questions, was the change request process, the perform integrated change control process, and finally we actually did the close project or process again around 10 to 15 questions in that. Okay, so integration was all about how you are integrating, how you are combining. But what is scope? What is scope? Like, you whatever you do on a project, you first need to define the scope. What you really want on this project. Like, for example, if we go back to our example of buying the car project, which we did last time, what was the scope? Like, if you ask me, I would say, okay, the car engine should be something like this. Then I would say I need this color. I need the interior should be heated. It should be leather seats. Like, all of these are my requirements. All of these are part of the scope. How I will achieve that, like, it's a customized car. I need to make sure that I get all of my requirements, and is it under my budget. All of those things are actually part of the project scope management process. So again, brief agenda, how we will cover this. We'll first, go over the high level description about the processes, what all processes we have. I'll give you a brief overview about it. Then we would go into each and every process in much more detail, where I would be explaining you all the inputs, all the tools and all the outputs. Just remember, I'm not saying that you need to memorize these. ITTOs are something which you don't need to memorize, but what is required is ask these questions to yourself. Why this is an input? Why this is a tool? Why this is an output? Once you start getting those concepts, once you start asking these questions to yourself, I'm pretty confident that you will start enjoying it. Uh, you know, Learning something is one thing, but understanding, building the concepts is more important, and this is why my basic purpose is to deliver to this class. Then after the detailed discussions, we will go towards the study focus, the revision time, where we will be talking about the important points of each of the processes, so that you can document that in your case notes. Just make sure whenever you start a particular process, you have your ITTO sheet from the website. So don't forget, just go to the website and download the free ITTO sheet, and make the case notes. Start and stop. This is the video for you, right? Start and stop. Make as many notes as possible, because in the end, all of these notes would be very, very, very helpful for you. And finally, we'll do the closure, a quick revision of what all things we covered. Okay, let's see what does this knowledge area involve. As I told you, it has 6 processes, and those 6 processes are in 2 process groups. Once we have the planning process group, and the other we have the monitoring and control process group. When we did the integration management knowledge area, there were 7 processes, but those 7 processes were actually covering all of the process groups. We started with initiation till the very end, which was the closing. But scope, this is all about planning and monitoring and control. Okay. So first of all, what we need to do is plan the scope. Like, basically, when a new requirement comes to me, the first thing I ask the people is that, okay, what do you really want? Like, when I went to the showroom to buy the car, the dealer asked me, Varun, what is your requirement? What is your requirement for this customized car? So that's I would say, like, the basic fundamental step is to start with the scope. Once you plan, then next process you actually do is the requirement. You collect the requirements, you go into much more details. And remember, the requirements should always be SMART. When I say SMART, it is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. I'll be discussing this in much more detail when I go into the collect requirements process. Once you have the requirements, then you make sure that you define that scope, you describe that requirement in much more detail. If you compare, if you remember the project charter which we discussed in the project integration management, project charter was all about high level, like it was all about high level requirements. But in this, we get the scope statement which talks about the requirements in much more detail, which talks about the description of that scope. Okay. It will also talk about the in scope, out of scope, what are the things which are in scope, out of scope, what are the project exclusions. That's very important, because as a project manager, it's your job to make sure that you are sticking to the requirements. Whatever is asked from you, this is where you need to stick on. If the stakeholders are diverting from the topic, it's you whose job is to make sure to bring them back on track. Once you have the scope, you actually work towards the work breakdown structure. If you remember, when we discussed the direct and managed project work in the integration management knowledge area, I told that you convert the work packages into deliverables, right? And work package is actually a deliverable. It's a deliverable base. This is where we would be talking about the work breakdown structure in much more detail. Another very important process, many questions comes from this work breakdown structure, so we'll talk about that in much more detail. Then the acceptance is also taken care in this particular process group. So this is actually part of the monitor and control process group. So it managed the acceptance of the project's product. So whatever was expected, your customer, like for example, think of the time when I went to the dealer to see my deliverable, whatever they have created for me, whatever they have developed for me. This is where I'm checking my requirements with that car. So like for example, if I said that I need heated seats for my customized car, then I will probably myself as a customer will go and check whether do I have those heated seats or not. Then if I said that I need a good music system, and when I say a good music system with specific configuration, right? So I would check that did the dealer did a good job in customizing those. Did the dealer do a good job in making sure my requirements were fulfilled? So when I check each and every requirement which was documented in the requirements, did they do it or not? And if they do, then it's my job as a customer to actually give you the sign off on that. So that's why we call it as that this acceptance of the product actually happens in this particular knowledge area. Why? Because we are actually checking it against the scope and making sure that you did a good job in that. And then control. I would say each and every knowledge area has a plan process. Like for example, I'm talking about scope right now. We have a plan process, which is the plan scope management. Similarly, it has a monitoring and control process, which is the control scope. Then when I talk about the time management, the schedule, we will have a plan schedule management process, and we will also have a control schedule process. Same goes with everything: control quality, plan quality, control cost, plan cost, all risks, procurement, stakeholders, everything would have a plan as well as a control process. Similarly to this, we have a control. It's your job as a project manager to make sure you are controlling the changes on the project. And until and unless your baselines are developed, you don't need to follow a particular the CCB process which I explained you in the perform integrated change control process. Okay, another thing, it's the responsibility of the project manager to plan and control the scope. So most of the time, like for example, project charter, I would say project charter is something which is the responsibility of the sponsor. But anything else, like we talk about scope, we talk about cost, time, all of those things are actually responsibility of the project manager. Of course, cost is something, the budget is formed, but I'll go that into much more details. But this is something, it's actually the responsibility of the project manager to take the requirements, not just like work with the team to get the requirements, to control the scope on the project. So it's the responsibility of the project manager. Then handle scope changes with structure, process and control. If there are scope changes, what are the processes, what are the what are the ways you are handling that, and if does it mean that you're changing the product, or does it mean that you are actually changing the process in itself? So we will be covering about that as well. Then project slash product related activities. Scope activities takes place before most other product related activities. So there is a difference between, I would say, product scope and project scope. I'll be discussing that later today, but that's an important concept as well. Then gold plating, deliver all of the scope but not more than the scope. No gold plating. So assume that I went to the dealer and I asked my customized car from them. They came up, they made sure that they fulfill all of my requirements, and they gave me few extra requirements as well, which I never asked for. So I could be happy about those extra requirements which was done for free by the dealer to make sure that they can get my business again, but or I am not happy about it, right? So gold plating is when you deliver something extra, and trust me guys, this is not a good technique. You should never do it. You should always stick to the plan. You should always stick to the requirements which was asked. If you do what I really ask, if I'm able to make sure I get that 3-letter word PMP after your name, that's my job is done. Okay, I'm over here. I'll teach you only the things which are important from the exam perspective. Like many times students come to me and they ask, Varun, can you explain me this topic? And if I see this is not important from the exam perspective, you'll never see a question, I will not explain it, because I want to stick to only the scope. And not because I follow the gold plating principle, like I don't follow this gold plating principle, but my purpose is just to pass the exam. I want you to get that 3-letter word after your name. Okay. Then project versus product scope, as discussed, we will be discussing that today. Project success is meeting the scope project requirements, and remember, only the scope requirements, nothing extra, nothing less. Okay, so project scope versus product scope. I've been discussing about this a lot. So product, if you see here closely, so product scope is actually in the middle, and the project scope is on the outermost umbrella. So when I say product scope, it's all about the features of that product. Like I was talking about the seats, the music system. Okay. Then I was also talking about the tires, right? All of those are actually my product related requirements. So product scope is those things. But when I talk about the project scope is all about, it's much more than the product. Like how I will get those heated seat, how I will get that the configuration on the music system which I'm expecting, how I can get those tires. So all of those are like how much time it will take, how much cost, quality, how they are communicating, how they're discussing with me, if there are any resources involved, not just human resources but other material or equipment resources. What is the risk associated with this? What are the procurement efforts? Does the dealer has to procure few things from the other dealers, or do they have to take aftermarket parts? So again, many things are involved in the product and project scope. As discussed, there are 6 processes of scope management, very important. And if you talk about which one are the most important, I will say the collect requirements, create WBS, validate. These 3 are very, very important. Of course, define scope is also very important because you'll get the scope statement. So, you may get some questions on the content of project scope statements, very important. And these plan, scope management and the control scope, these are 2 common processes just like any other knowledge area. Okay, now let's see the high level description of these 6 processes, and then we will go into much more detail about each of these individual processes. So first we have the plan scope management. It's documenting how the project scope would be defined, validated and controlled. So again, all these planning processes, it's all about how you will do it. Like how you will make sure, how you will create the WBS, how you will define the scope, how you will validate that scope, how you will make sure that you're controlling the changes. So the keyword for these plan processes is always how. Then you will collect the requirements, understanding and documenting the stakeholders' need in product and project scope. What do I really need? Like the example, heated seats, a good music system with a specific configuration. And again, remember, it has to be specific. I need to define that specific. Like, is it, I don't know the units of music system or something, but it has to be very specific. Then we will define the scope, where we will get the scope statement. If you have your ITTO sheet with you, go on the third tab, which is the differentiation tab. You could see the difference between the scope statement and your project charter. Very important, you should understand. So charter was at a high level, but the scope statement is something which is at a very detailed level about those requirements. Then we will create a work breakdown structure, a tree-based hierarchical structure. That's your work breakdown structure. There are many components like the planning packages, the control accounts, and of course the work package is the most important out of all of these. Very important. Many questions comes from this create WBS process, more than 10 for sure. Then we do the validate scope, which is gaining the formal acceptance of the deliverables. Like myself as a customer will go to the dealer, will check my product. When I say product, I'm talking about the customized car. I will, in one piece, I will have this document with me, which will have the list of all the requirements, and at the other end, I will have my product, the car. I'll do a comparison. I'll make sure that whatever documents I have, whatever features are there in the product, is it meeting my requirements or not? If it is meeting my requirements, I would give my sign off, I'll give my approval to move to the next. After I validate, the last thing we will be doing the control scope, which is like, ensuring that the work matches the scope and changes to the scope are carefully evaluated and managed. So this is important. Like, every time you're doing something, you'll get a lot of changes. And it's your job as a project manager to control those changes. If there is a change request, make sure that it follows the perform integrated change control process. You have to do that detailed impact analysis. Like, what is the consequence of that change on that triple constraint triangle. Okay, so this marks the completion of the introduction. Next, we would be discussing our plan scope management, which would be our next unit.